So, hello and welcome everyone to the third episode of 1,000 Paths to a Career in Arbitration. I'm Mandy Lee, the founder of Careers in Arbitration. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Before I turn the floor over to our host with the most, a quick housekeeping point. We are recording this webinar, and so we ask all participants to kindly make sure that their microphones and videos are switched off during the webinar. The networking sessions that will follow this webinar will not be recorded, and so you can turn your cameras on and ask questions to your heart's content then. But for now, we're focusing on our fabulous speakers. So thank you all for respecting this request. Right, on to more important matters. After all, no one is here to listen to me. As always, I have the pleasure of introducing our host with the most and the architect of this fabulous webinar series, Jessica Rado. Jessica obtained her LLM from Fordham Law School and is a New York-based litigation associate and a passionate Viz-Moot coach. This is a special episode today because we have one of my former colleagues as a guest. I'll let them disclose themselves in due course. But I also want to say a quick shout out to Rick Smith if he is joining us, as he's another one of our former colleagues. So a small Seymour's reunion. So a very, very special episode today. All right. On that note, Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mandy. Thank you to Careers in Arbitration for hosting this webinar, and thank you to all who are joining us today. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is the third episode of our series, and what this series does is it explores all the possible ways to get into international arbitration, however that difficult may seem, however competitive the field might be. What we want to do with this webinar is reassure everyone that there's no one right path to success, but there's actually 1,000. And for each episode, we have two speakers who will share their path and how they got to where they are right now. And we always have a theme because they always have something in common and something different. Our theme today is going to be, how can I use my UK LLM to pursue a career in international arbitration in and outside of the United Kingdom? If you joined us for our previous webinars, we did discuss LLMs in the United States in the very first episode. So today we're crossing the pond and looking at LLMs on the other side. And we have two fantastic speakers to do this today who both studied in London, but pursued very different degrees and are now working in very different time zones. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Florencia Villaggi and Mian Sami Uddin. Florencia, he's an Argentinian lawyer. She has just joined very recently, just this week, the arbitration underwriting team at Burford Capital as vice president, based in New York. Before working here, she worked at Herbert Smith Freehills for almost 10 years. First in London and then in New York. And not only did Florencia obtain an LLM from Queen Mary University of London, but she wasn't happy with just one LLM, and she pursued a second one in New York City at Fordham Law, and she just sat for the New York bar. Joining us from the other side of the world, we have Sami joining us from Pakistan. Sami is a partner at B&R of course, in Pakistan. He's a barrister and advocate of the Supreme Court of Pakistan and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitration. He acts as counsel in domestic and international arbitration and court litigation matters. He has been part of the working group of experts on Pakistan's investment regime reforms and advised the government on international investment agreements and ISTS reforms. And recently, he has been appointed as a member of the Arbitration Law Review Committee set up by the Law and Justice Commission of Pakistan. I have given you very brief bios, very brief introductions of our wonderful speakers, but we will be sharing links to their full bios and their contacts because they have done many more things that we are just not capable of fitting all in one intro right now. I'm going to move on to the questions, so we're going to jump right to our discussion. And since we're talking about LLMs, our very first stop will be, when is the right time to pursue an LLM? If you're a prospective student, you might be wondering, do I pursue it right after my bachelor's of law? Do I pursue it later in my career? And what kind of LLM might I want to pursue? So as I mentioned, both Florencia and Sami have obtained LLMs in London. Florencia studied at Queen Mary of Law, where she obtained an LLM in comparative dispute resolution in 2012, while Sami pursued an LLM in professional legal skills at City University in 2009. So let's start with Sami. First question for you. When did you choose to pursue your LLM, and what made you think that was the right time for you?
Thank you, Jessica. Before I start, just thank you to you, to Mandy, and to Careers in Arbitration for hosting me on a very interesting topic. And hello to Florencia. I'm happy to share this talk with her. So funnily, mine wasn't a very traditional type of decision to do the LLM. As was the trend in Pakistan, I had first decided to do my bar vocational course and become a barrister. And that was the trend for court advocates in Pakistan. Everyone wanted to be a barrister and be an advocate in court. And it was right after I completed my bar course that I found out that City University was offering this sort of add-on to the bar course whereby you could get an LLM degree. So it required submitting a proposal, doing research, and then writing a lengthy dissertation on an area of practice and procedure or something that had to do with professional legal skills. And so that was the moment when I thought, hey, this will give me the opportunity to stay on in London while I look for work. And at the same time, I also managed to find work, and that's where I met Amanda as well. So they kind of both happened at the same time, but we'll move on and I'll tell you about that story later. But it wasn't a decision from the start. I was first just planning to become a barrister and then come back to Pakistan to practice in court. And then I found this opportunity and I thought that I would capitalize on that.
Great. Same question for you, Florencia. When did you decide when was the right time for you to pursue your LLM?
For me, on my last year of university, I discovered just by chance, really, I was just walking by the university and I just saw in one of the walls and advertising about the Bismuth. And I saw something about Vienna and I was like, oh, that would be great. I will be traveling and, it sounded fun. It was in English. And I was like, I will be practicing my English. I have no idea what arbitration was. And I signed into that and I found this amazing thing about, the advocacy and international law. And I just fell in love with it, with the dispute resolution of international disputes. And I started to practice arbitration when when I finished law school. In my practice in Argentina, there was a boom of international arbitration. So I started practice law in a law firm and started to do arbitration. So for about 5 years, that was my practice. And then, after practicing law for about 5 years and doing international arbitration, I thought, well, it will be great to go abroad and get actually, like a degree and an exposure to international arbitration. And then I started to kind of like researching the best, law schools. And in Queen Mary, they have the International Arbitration School, which was the first one in the world, and with amazing professors. And so I applied to different universities, not only in the UK, also here in the US, but I got a scholarship from the UK Foreign Office called the Chevening Scholarship, which was amazing. It give you amazing network opportunities. They will pay for everything. So it was like an amazing opportunity. So that's why I decided to go and do it there. And I did it at that time, I guess, because I thought, after law school, I thought I needed to gain a little bit of experience. I thought if I have a little bit of experience, I will make, and I still think that would be my advice, that when I did the LLM, at that time, there were people coming right after law school, and there were people coming with more experience. And I thought the people that did it after having some work experience would getting more out of it, because you could use that work experience to get more out of it. And also, if you want to work after that, you will have a little bit more tools to find work out of it. So that was the reason I did it at that time. And I think also it make it a little bit easier for me to find, to get into universities and to get into the scholarships, because I think, my work experience make it a little bit stronger applications to get into those things and getting opportunities.
Great. So we already have our first step of the day. Work experience can help if you're considering applying for an LLM. It might be something that can make you stand out in your application. Moving on to the second question. After you completed your LLMs, did you stay and work in the UK? This time, let's start with you, Florencia. Did you stay after?
Yes, I did. I stayed for many years. To be so at the beginning, my idea was to stay for an experience. So my visa will allow me to stay for a few months only. I think in the UK they change, at some point they will let you stay for like 2 years, and they will let you stay. They change many times. In my case, when I was there in 2012, they only will let you stay for like 4 months. After your studies. So my idea was that, like, just getting like an internship and stay for a few months. When I started looking for it, when I started studying a few months after, I started like literally sending emails to absolutely everyone, anyone I knew, anyone that everyone knew. I started looking in the internet, anyone that has anything to do to arbitration, I will email. I'll go online, and anyone that was trying to have an internship program, I will be, contacting. And it was very frustrating. I will get in no answers or rejections. I will keep trying. And as I say, my idea was just that, to get an experience. And at the end of the day, what I was seeing is that most of the people that were getting those opportunities were people that were back home working at a law firm and had a contact where their partners were just calling the partners at other law firms and getting that, maybe 6 months or 1 year contract, just, because the law firms were friends, and then they will get that going on. So I didn't get much traction on anything, to be honest. And then I went online on the Herbert Smith Free Hills. I applied. They have this internship program going on. I did the same with Freshfields. I did the same with, I think, many of the law firms I had it. And I got a few interviews, and I have a lot of them had exams. I get into I remember with the HSF, I get into the interview. When I went to the interview, they make me the exam. And it was like in the middle of the exam season of the LLM. So I have like one exam, the interview with an exam in the interview, and an exam like the next day. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Anyway, and I also remember that I thought it went horrible, and I was like so depressed, saying, okay, this went really bad, they were never gonna call me. And anyway, and it happened. So what got me really depressed at that time, I think, was that what I was seeing in the job fairs in the market is that the UK market was made for students in the UK that were gonna do a training program. So when I was going to there, they were saying, okay, so you're going to spend 2 years going from, 6 months doing different stuff like corporate law that I was not interested in on, or, whatever. And then after 2 months, you're going to be a lawyer. I was like, wait a minute, I've been a lawyer for 6 years. It's like, I don't want to go back and do all this again. So it was, it didn't really fit what I was looking for. So I was losing hope. Hopefully, it came, I was able to get this internship, and it worked out for me, but I found it really, really difficult to break into the UK market. I have to say, in my LLM, we were 500 people, and very, very few got into the market, just because I think here in the US, you get and 1 year OPT, and I think you get a job fair when everyone is looking for giving a job to a foreign qualified lawyer for 1 year with, there is a job market for that. In the UK, I found that there was no job market for that. You had to find the cracks to kind of like, get into it. So I'm not saying there is no way. I'm just saying that for someone from like me, from coming from Latin America, it was a little bit tricky to find a way in.
Okay, so it sounds like it was it was hard, but you managed. So everybody be encouraged. There's a way. Same question for you, Sami. Did you stay and work in the UK after your LLM?
Yes, I did. And again, just like the LLM, it was entirely sort of unplanned. After I did my bar vocational course, and I knew, like Florencia was saying, the visa requirements at the time allowed you to stay for a further 2 years on a post-study work visa. So since I was doing that sort of additional dissertation and getting my LLM, I also thought that, okay, might as well get some experience. But it just happened that a friend said that there's a firm that's involved in this really high-profile commercial litigation matter. It was a deceit and breach of warranty claim in the Queen's Bench Division, now called King's Bench Division, I think. And that led me to my sort of my job over there at Seymour's Law, where I met Mandy. She was a young trainee over there, and I was sort of under her, basically going through whole files of disclosure documents, and that led me to spending a good, I think, 2 years just getting all sorts of experience in that commercial law firm. And that was excellent. My plan, however, had always been to return to Pakistan, because I've always wanted to sort of come back and practice here in the courts. And as I said, international, the LLM was sort of off chance, and so was the working opportunity. But that eventually led to me being introduced to international arbitration, both in my LLM and where I worked, there was some arbitration as well. But that experience then sort of, led to further changes. So it wasn't planned like that, but yeah, I did stay on, and it was great.
Okay. Well, we sort of answered what was going to be my next question already. I was going to ask you if the choice of staying was planned or wasn't planned. So it sounds like Florencia was planning on staying for, those couple of months, getting some experience, and then she ended up staying for 6 years. No, not 6 years. I'm sorry. I actually don't know how many, but you stayed for years in London. And Sami, kind of the same thing. Want some experience, not really like looking to stay, but ended up having a great experience after the LLM. So I'm going to skip to another question. In hindsight, is there anything that you would have done differently during your LLM to prepare to what you did after the LLM in London? Would you have, I don't know, picked up more internships? Would you have started looking earlier? anything that comes to mind that you think you would have done differently? Let's start with Sami this time.
Right. So just a bit sort of brief background. So it was on that LLM, and when I was doing my research that I got introduced. That's when I found out what international arbitration was, because my research had to be on some sort of practice and procedure, and then I got introduced to international arbitration, and I was like, wow, what is this? And then it fascinated me. I remember sort of being in the library and reading these books about the IBA rules on taking of evidence and just finding everything so interesting. And now that I see that, you know, my interest in sort of the path where I'm focusing more on international arbitration, what I would have done slightly differently is perhaps done a separate independent LLM focused in international arbitration, done more academic sort of you know, studies at that time. Initially, it was more about, okay, you know, when am I gonna just get qualified as a barrister and then get my license and then present before a judge? That's what, you know, I wanted to do. Maybe it was all those movies where you know, A Few Good Men and Tom Cruise shouting at you. What was that actor's name? But anyway, so, you know, the fantasizing, arguing before a judge. And so I would have researched a bit more, you know, sort of spent separate time, and perhaps done an LLM after, like Florencia said, getting experience, practicing a bit, because that's when you really understand what's out there in the market. So yeah.
Okay. What about you, Florencia? Anything in hindsight that you would do differently?
I think, you know, when you're young and you have the time and you have, you know, no kids and work and commitments, the more time you kind of spend, I mean, if you already know that you want to have a career in international arbitration, the more time you kind of spend on languages, I think that's going to be very useful, because, you know, learning languages is always useful in international arbitration. The more languages you know, the more you can open your horizon on kind of disputes you can do. The more you can learn about contract law, I think it's always useful, because there's always a contract aspect. You know, there's, you know, 90% of the cases are about contracts. International law, obviously, there's always an aspect of international law. So I think, you know, those are the aspects. I think there's, if you're interested in this kind of law, the more you can spend on that. And then, you know, spend sometimes networking, you know, I mean, that's the thing that when you get busy, you wish you would have more time to do that. So when you do have the time, go as much events that you can, and, you know, and interact with people. And I think that's my advice when you're young. All those connections you make when you're doing your LLM, I used to go to every single event, and the connections you do at your LLM, they're gonna be the practitioners tomorrow, and they're gonna be in the institutions and in the law firms, and, you know, arbitrators, and it's great. And it's not only great because they're going to help in your careers, because they're going to be your friends, and it's great to have friends in what you choose to be your area of practice. So I think that's my advice.
Okay. Since you've both worked in the UK and outside of the UK, my next question is, what are some differences that you've seen in the two systems, meaning day-to-day activity, firm culture? Is there anything in particular that you remember being different in the UK than it is where you're working now? Let's start with Sami.
Well, this would require a whole separate session of its own, you know.
Yeah.
The key points. Well, the first thing that comes to mind.
I mean, there's a huge difference. Pakistan, obviously, being sort of, you know, a former colony of of Britain, the court system is a lot like, the UK and the legal system. But, in Pakistan, because of perhaps the population and sort of the lack of development, there's a lot of delays in the legal system. And so Pakistan hasn't really reformed in that way. And that obviously affects, and I think that affects the legal culture itself. So, you will have trials or cases which will run, 6 to 7 years, where you'd find it being wrapped up in 2 years or under, or 1.5 years in the UK. And that affects how people run their practice. So, you just have to take in more work and then manage sort of all of it together, and things can seem pretty haphazard for someone who comes from there. We had a barrister, a young barrister who had just got tenancy in chambers in one of London's, I think, commercial sets, and he wanted to take some time to come to Pakistan and work with us. So sort of got a summer placement, and so he was with us for about 2 months, I think. And he used to go with me to the High Court, the Lahore High Court, and I had some important international arbitration related court matters, and he was surprised in many things. The fact that the judge fixed a date for a hearing, but he's too busy, he can't hear it, so it's gone off to some other date, and then that happens again. So I mean, that's the difference in the legal sort of culture, I think, that a practitioner would face. But I think for anyone who's decided, like me, to stay in their country and to work locally and in international arbitration, I think the room for developing your own career and development of law is so huge that the opportunities are really, really great. So yeah, so that's something to keep in mind for anyone who wants to, make that decision.
What about you, Florencia? What are some of the differences that you've seen in your different?
I agree. I think we can have many hours. Many are just difference in culture. Like when I started working in the UK, something I found very different is that the way they communicate, right? So just I think other parts of the world are much more direct, so they will just tell you, just do this. And in the UK, they're like, oh, it will be great if you could consider how to, they're just very polite, I would say. My particular situation is that my firm asked me to move office from London to New York, and then to be in New York, I wanted to be qualified as a New York lawyer, and to get the New York bar, I needed to have an LLM here in New York. So that's why I did a second LLM here. But I wouldn't recommend to have 2 LLMs. I don't think it's needed unless you want it to be double qualified. And I only can think of that if, I guess it's useful in international arbitration, because if you want to be an arbitrator, you can, sit in cases under New York law and other different laws, or if you want to be counsel under those 2 laws, it's going to be useful for international arbitration. I guess it's going to be useful, but only if you want to practice in both jurisdictions, I guess.
Okay, so it sounds like culture is the main difference that you can see when working in different countries. Well, thank you both for sharing this. I think this was very, very helpful and something to keep in mind when we're switching countries. We have just a few more questions, and then we're going to move on to the networking room. So I see a lot of questions coming through the chat. Hang tight. I have only a few more, and then we'll be able to ask all the questions that you'd like. Very broad question for Sami. How do you think your LLM helped you get where you are today?
Right. So, like I said earlier, I mean, my LLM actually introduced me to, when I was doing research, introduced me to international arbitration. And it was from then on that I really wanted to develop a career. So after I got experience in London, and when I came back, I joined a firm over here that, was involved in international law practice and international arbitration. Immediately, I got involved in, one of the largest in investor state arbitrations relating to the Rico Dick mines in Balochistan. That's the basically Tethyan Copper Company, which was an Australian mining company that had filed a case against Pakistan, resulted in an $8 billion award. And then, gradually, I just kept doing more of that. There's international commercial arbitration matters. My current firm where I am, I do that. But it allowed me to sort of do both. And I think that's what's required when you're practicing in your own home country and not necessarily in a big arbitration hub. You have to be a good sort of all-round lawyer, know all the laws, commercial laws in the area in which you're practicing. So being a court advocate and being an arbitration practitioner, go hand in hand. And I think my LLM, which started off as, the bar vocational course, I was trained as a barrister. And then, through my research being introduced to international arbitration, I think I got the best of both worlds, despite, in hindsight, everyone wanting to do something more or doing something differently. But I think that's how it enabled me. So, that's one option how people can go about it. Yeah, not everyone can do 2 LLMs, and it might not be advisable, like Florencia is saying. But, perhaps you can do 1 LLM or some sort of a practitioner's course, the way in the UK there's the legal practice course, which solicitors do, or the bar professional training course, and then couple it with something else. There are a lot of diploma courses out there in international arbitration. And then you get the best of both worlds to get ready for a career in arbitration.
Sounds great. And final question for Florencia. Well, we sort of touched upon this already. So you do have 2 LLMs, London and New York, Queen Mary and Fordham Law School. What differences have you seen in the 2 programs?
Yeah, they were very different. The LLM in the UK, they were annual models. So you choose, 3 or 4 annual models, and then you do a final dissertation, which is like a big research project. They were very academically intensive. In the US, they were shorter. The subjects were like semesters, quite shorter, less demanding, I will say, academically less demanding. Not all of them have like this final examinations. You could sometimes passes with like a TP project or some other kind of like. I found it a little bit more demanding academically, the UK LLM, and then the final research project was quite intense, that I didn't get in the US LLM. There was no that was not a requirement. I think for me it was a very different experience, because the LLM I did 10 years ago in the UK, I did it a 1 year full time when I was, immersed in the experience of, living abroad, and making million friends and going to all kind of activities, which is the kind of experience I recommend when you go there and you really make connections and you really, I think that's the experience you want. The one I did in Fordham, it was great, but I was doing it really because I needed to get the US, the New York bar. So I was working full time. I had a newborn and a toddler, and I was commuting to the city. So I really didn't have any time to do it. So it was really, really a juggling exercise. So I couldn't make the connections. I couldn't make a million friends. So I didn't get the same experience of it. I learned, of course, I did it on US law, so I learned and, I passed the exam, so forth, but it wasn't the same experience. So I think I would recommend if you do the LLM, you want to get the full experience to get those connections. So in that sense, for me, it was very different. In the LLM I did 10 years ago in the UK, as I said, I went with the Chevening scholarship, which made me met people from everyone around the world, all, leaders in their countries, amazing people from everywhere. We traveled the world together. I met my husband there. It was, it was life-changing. So I definitely recommend everyone to do that kind of experience. This time around, it was a different one. It was a part-time thing that I just needed to do it to pass the bar. So it was different.
All right. One final question, again, very broad. Just the first thing that comes to mind for both of you. Is there something in particular from your LLM that you cherish to this day, whether that's a special class that you loved, an event that would happen during the LLM, a person you met, a feeling of living in London? What is the one thing that you still think to this day? Sami?
For me, it had to be the sort of late night alone in the library, just me and the books. I kind of preferred it to the classes with other people and the lecturers. So yeah, being alone with the books is sort of my preferred thing, and I've realized that as I've grown older.
Very interesting. And what about you, Florencia? What's the one thing for you?
No, for me it was the friends. I make, great friendships until today. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much to both of our speakers for sharing their experiences and answering our questions. Before we move on to the networking rooms, we are closing the recording. So back to our wonderful Mandy to close it up.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Let me just say once again, on behalf of Careers in Arbitration, thank you so much to Florencia and Sami for joining us today. Thank you to all of you, our audience. We hope that you're enjoying this series so far. Please do stay tuned for further episodes in due course, and you can always check out past episodes on our YouTube channel. So we encourage you to subscribe. As Jessica has said, we are going to have some networking, and you're going to have the opportunity to ask all of those burning questions that you're so keen to ask and you've been dropping in the chat so far. And for those who were not able to attend live, we strongly encourage you to do so in the future if you are keen to have the opportunity to speak directly to our speakers. After all, networking is a really big part of arbitration. I know we keep saying this, but it really is super, super important. All right, so thank you all very much, and we'll see you in the networking room shortly.